Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Archives. My name is Sam Anthony, and I'm the director of the Author Lecture Program, and we are honored to have with us tonight David Morton, as he will discuss his book, Off the Record, The Technology and Culture of Sound Recording in America. A few points before we begin. Hopefully everyone has a program that explains a bit about the National Archives, this program, and also David Morton himself. We have a bio, and if you see in there, he comes all the way from Rutgers University. He was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, received his PhD from Georgia Tech, and is a member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers at Rutgers University. So without further ado, I would like to welcome David Morton.
Thanks for coming out tonight. I considered taping my lecture and planning a tape recorder up here and just hitting the button. And then I had an even better idea, which was to do that, but lip sync to my lecture, and see how that went over. But I decided that was a little too postmodern or something, probably too postmodern for me. In the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen the publication of two very important volumes, the papers of Thomas Edison for the years 1878, 1877. We've seen a new biography of Edison by Paul Israel, who's a colleague of mine at Rutgers University. So we've got some fresh insight into the invention of sound recording. Or I probably should say the invention of sound recording and reproducing, because sound recording had actually been invented some years earlier by a French inventor. But this phonautograph, as it was called, was just a sound recorder. It had no ability to reproduce sound. So the announcement of Edison's phonograph, a device that could both record and reproduce sound, in 1878, the announcement of it was in 1878, was something of a breakthrough. It prompted Alexander Graham Bell to wonder aloud in public why he hadn't invented the phonograph, because he was so familiar with this earlier device, the phonautograph, and he claimed he had in fact articulated in his public speeches the principles of the phonograph, but had never actually followed through on it. So it was Edison, in fact, who produced this first recorder and reproducer in his lab at Menlo Park, New Jersey. Incidentally, I was just at the spot, Menlo Park, where the phonograph and lots of other things were invented. Now Edison's lab is gone, but there's a big 50-foot tall concrete tower marking the spot with a big light bulb on top of it. Nobody knows about it. It's off hidden in the woods somewhere. The real landmark in Menlo Park is something that's more appropriate for New Jersey, if you know New Jersey at all. It's a great big shopping mall. A very nice one, too. But that's Menlo Park for most people. People at the time certainly thought Edison's phonograph was important, even though at this time, the 1870s, all it could really do was demonstrate the principle of recording and reproducing. But even in the infancy of this device, this was what really made Edison's reputation, transformed his reputation into the Wizard of Menlo Park, the inventor of the age, and so forth. But I think it's a common assumption that what Edison was trying to do in 1877, 1878 was to invent this system of home entertainment that we came to associate with the phonograph later. In fact, his invention was sort of led in this direction, and almost by accident or happenstance. At first, what he was working on was a device to record telegraph code, the Morse dots and dashes coming in over the lines. he later sort of came to believe that he could record the telephone signals coming in over the wires in much the same way. But he found that very difficult to actually do. It was harder to imagine that than it was to actually put it into practice. And so he attempted to record sound waves directly using the kinetic energy of these vibrations to engrave a record into a soft medium. And the medium he used was tinfoil wrapped around a cylinder. So with this, the phonograph was an accomplishment. But he announced that what he had invented was a talking machine. And I think that's sort of significant. Not a singing machine, not a music box or an improved musical instrument, but a talking machine. And he went on to announce or describe a bunch of possible applications for it. Entertainment being way down the list somewhere. Also on the list was musical training, but that's a little bit different than entertainment. Anybody who's ever taken a piano lesson knows that musical training is hardly entertaining. But he also mentioned historical documentation, voice letters, telephone recording, of course, which was his favorite, and other things. Hence the title of my book, Off the Record, as an effort to look at this whole diverse range of applications for the phonograph. The musical, the non-musical, their uses not only for entertainment, but for education and communication and surveillance and social control and advertising and 1,000 other things. So the first commercial phonograph a few years later was in fact a office dictation machine, not an entertainment device. Edison and some competitors improved his original, the sort of crude tinfoil phonograph, replacing the tinfoil medium with a wax cylinder, which made a more sensitive recording, a better recording. But Edison and his new competitors were sort of caught up in the office efficiency movement of the 19th century, when office managers were starting to do what factory managers had done earlier, which was to think about mechanization and efficiency in the office. And Edison thought he had invented a valuable tool for businessmen and for secretaries. But this dictation machine sold in small numbers, sold very slowly. And the various phonograph manufacturers who had bought licenses to enable them to manufacture and sell the phonograph, they were sorely disappointed with this technology. And suddenly, this entertainment phonograph emerges. In the early 1890s, some individuals discovered that people would actually pay for the experience of hearing the phonograph. They modified a phonograph to make it a coin-operated device. They provided multiple sets of listening tubes, sort of crude predecessors of headphones, so that half a dozen people could listen to the phonograph at once. And soon afterward, there were cheap phonographs available for the home. Disc records appeared, which could be quite literally stamped out in sort of mass production form, so they got cheaper. So the entertainment uses of the phonograph came as, I think, something of a surprise. But it was a welcome surprise because this office dictation market was a disappointment and was always a disappointment. Businessmen simply did not embrace the use of the phonograph, and it never sold as well as an office appliance as did some of the more successful things we associate with offices, like the typewriter. So the entertainment use of the phonograph established a kind of pattern of commodified, in-home musical entertainment that's persisted without interruption to the present day, just the technology has changed. Sales of these entertainment phonographs rose rapidly from the 1890s to about the middle of the 1920s until many American homes, maybe most middle-class homes, had a phonograph and a collection of records. But the coming of radio and its free entertainment in the 1920s sent this phonograph market into a real tailspin, and the depression of the 30s made it even worse. Desperate record companies introduced technical innovations, sort of high-fidelity innovations, but the public was indifferent. By the mid-1930s, the whole phonograph industry, which had been quite large, had virtually disappeared entirely. A lot of people were saying that the phonograph was obsolete. It's hard to believe now when we have so much sound recording and reproducing technology in our homes and everywhere else, but that's what people thought. So virtually the only place that sound recording was a growth industry was in the movie business. The motion pictures had adopted sound in the 1920s, first on disc, and then later directly on the film using a new photographic process. So through the 1930s, sound recording equipment was selling pretty well to motion picture producers, Hollywood studios. And our ordinary lacquer disc, shellac disc, was saved at the last minute by the jukebox. These coin-operated phonographs had a sort of resurgence in the 1930s. They became a fixture in restaurants and bars and all sorts of public places. During the war, record sales continued to grow a little bit, but there were some severe sort of restrictions on materials and other things. So it wasn't until the end of the war that things really started to happen again, and this is when we saw the second great boom in the phonograph sales. In the late 1940s, just to skim through a half a century of technical change, in the late 1940s, both the 45 RPM record and the long-playing 33 1/3 disc were introduced. Both of these were fabulously successful. By the mid-1960s, they were both, especially the LP, they were challenged by the coming of the 8-track tape, which we look back on now as this sort of big flop, sort of a joke. At the time, it was a great success. It was the first real mass market product, tape product that came along.